What's the wildest thing you've heard because you happen to understand the language? Suddenly understanding enough Spanish to know the little old ladies next to me were gossiping about my outfit. A wholesome one by proxy. Parents of a friend were traveling through Canada with a rented campervan. They had stopped at a random breakfast place and were conversing in Frisian while eating, just chatting about their plans for the day. A local walked past them, then froze and turned around, and greeted them in Frisian. Turned out that man of around mid-60 had German origin, and his mum had spoken Frisian with him, and since her death decades ago, he had not heard a word in the language. They sat down and chatted with him for quite a while, and he broke out in tears from happiness. Was in a hotel in Boston, and the guy in the elevator told his wife that had just ripped a fat, but silent fart and hoped that we wouldn't notice. We had to hold in our chuckles because chances of encountering someone who understands Swiss German are quite low, so you get why he would feel comfortable saying it. Well then, when they got off the elevator, I just said to my GF, "Bo, it stinks in here, doesn't it?" in Swiss German, and the look of horror on that guy's face was absolutely priceless. I was listening to an American reporter interviewing a Venezuelan citizen in Venezuela after the crash. The Venezuelan guy said we're eating rats and seagulls, and they translated it into something like people are having a hard time finding 3 meals a day. Was a flight attendant in my early 20s standing mid-plane during the safety demonstration. This couple were making fun of my coworkers and I in the country's second most spoken language during the demo. They assumed I didn't understand what they were saying right in front of me while looking directly at me. After the safety demo, I walked up to them and asked them to get ready for takeoff in the language they just insulted us in. That was satisfying. They were mortified, apologizing profusely and trying to be overly sweet the rest of the flight. I accepted the apology gracefully, but suggested it's always in poor taste to behave like that whether you assume others speak your language or not. I went to an African hair shop in Wales, and the two men who own it started talking about me in a language called Yoruba. They said, "Look at that girl eating like a dog." I was just munching on a bread roll. I left swiftly after and called my dad. He said I should have replied to them in Yoruba, which I wish I did, but I was too scared lol. Made me rethink how I eat forever though. I heard the lady talking about me in the nail place. I was just aghast, because I'm mixed race, but you can tell I'm part Asian. It was a wild to assume there was no chance I'd understand their language. Also my feet skin is not that rough, calm down. A white friend of my mother's was on a bus in London many years ago. 2 other white women on the bus started talking about how ugly her hat was, in Swahili. My mother's friend waited until she was about to get off to say, also in Swahili, "You know, I've had my doubts about this hat, but all my friends insisted it looked wonderful. Thank you for your honesty." My mother would probably like me to know here that the hat was perfectly fine. White man in an Asian country. Went to a factory to buy a purse sheet for my work. At the reception desk, as I am ordering from the young woman there, a guy comes in from the factory, looks at me and says to her in a Chinese dialect, "You don't like white people, eh?" They both smiled and he went away. As she turned back to me, I looked curious and repeated the question in the dialect back to her. She turned bright red and busied herself with the paperwork. My wife speaks the same dialect, so I picked up a few phrases. I was waitressing in my early 20s and 2 guys came in and ordered a beer each. I came back to the table for drink orders and asked, "Can I get you guys another beer?" And one says in Spanish, "No, but you can give me head." I threw a drink in his face. I don't know about wild, but this is my story. I'm an engineer and I used to design control systems for wind turbines. Some of our customers were in China and we would go and run a week-long training course to hand over the control system. None of us spoke any Chinese, so we hired a guy in Beijing to translate for us. It seemed to work well. I started doing a Chinese course. Next time I went to run the course, I realized that almost every sentence this translator produced amounted to literally "then you do something 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 and something something happens." The words shenmi something 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 were in about every 3rd sentence. I don't know how much value they got from the training. I was on a water taxi in Fiji, and the German family seated next to us had a very heated debate about what the best type of pastry was. They had gotten breakfast from the cafe in the port before we departed, so that started the debate. It was really funny to overhear and I thought about chiming in with my 2 cents, but I just minded my business. When I lived in Australia, I heard 2 French tourists, both men, talking some absolutely repulsive shit about the women on the train, in French. Like graphically describing what they'd like to do to them. The carriage was full of students, about 70 girls in school uniforms, all very obviously underage. After about 45 seconds of listening to this, I turned around and unloaded on them in fluent French, "Just a full-on shame on you disgusting pigs," sort of dress down. They were shocked as hell and silent for the rest of the journey and faced the doors for the rest of the journey. I don't know how they thought no one would speak French there. It's one of the most spoken languages on the planet. The last things I said were in English, so everyone around knew exactly why I was yelling at them too. Heard some craziness in a cafe. Once this dude was spilling tea about his cat like it was world drama. Cat fights are no joke. When I lived in the US, I overheard the most Dutch conversation of my life. Some tourist was scolding her son because he broke his bike and his father would be disappointed. Also, some dude ran into Walgreens, went up to the counter and said in a very obvious Dutch accent, "I touched the waterfall, is it dangerous?" while holding out his finger. Lol. Missed an international flight once in grad school and got rerouted through Paris CDG, where we had a layover. Went to the information desk and asked in English some info about connecting flights, gates, etc., and the two customer service girls started mocking me in French for being an ignorant American who knew nothing. But I'm Canadian and speak French, so I responded in French that we'd just traveled all night and were tired, but thanks for the help. Proud to say I made two French girls blush pretty hard. Not me, but an ex-in-law of mine was a taxi driver. A couple of Chinese guys get in the back and off they go. Partway through the journey they start talking to each other in Mandarin about how easy it would be to murder the driver and dump his body. He gave it a pause, then replied in Mandarin that they'd better not, followed by their stunned surprise then serious backpedaling in English.